Left Foot Media, my name is Brendan Malone, and in today's video what I thought we'd do is we'd watch the opening 3 minutes or so of Star Wars The Last Jedi. And as we go, I thought we would pause it in order to highlight the glaring flaws that are present right from the very beginning of this movie. I guess today's video is really an exercise in trying to show to the critics of Star Wars The Last Jedi that the complaints that we have about this film, they're not arbitrary, they're not subjective, they are real, and anyone who is willing to look and to be honest about it can see that these problems were present in the film right from the very start, and that what they actually show is that there was a lack of commitment to basic standards of excellence when it comes to the artistry of filmmaking. There was no real creative accountability, it seems, or perhaps the process was rushed. But basically, no one was stopping to say, hey, hold on a minute, is this really the best version that we can put to screen of this movie? There's flaws in the screenwriting, there's flaws in the way the actual cinematic aspects of this film, the filmography, the cinematography are utilized, and we can see all of these flaws right from the very start of this movie. One other thing I should also say before we get too much further into today's video, it's summer, it's the holiday period here, and so it's quite conceivable that you are going to hear the dulcet tones of my neighbour's lawnmowers in the background. I apologise for this. This is just the reality of what we have to deal with at this time of year. So let's get into it, and let's start with the opening credit crawl. I'm not going to play that to you. I'm just going to put it up on screen as we go to show that in actual fact, even before we get the opening scene of the film, there are some glaring flaws that are already present in this movie in the opening crawl. There are things that actually someone should have stopped and said, hey, hold on a minute, that doesn't make sense. There are contradictions present in the opening crawl of this film. So first of all, the very first sentence in the opening crawl is this: the First Order reigns, full stop, period. So this is pretty straightforward kind of stuff. It's a pretty bold but simple, clear and concise declarative statement. The First Order is now in charge of the galaxy. They control everything because why? They reign. How do we know that? Because the opening crawl of the film has told us that they reign. But having just told us that they reign, it then goes on to say the following: having decimated the peaceful Republic, Supreme Leader Snoke now deploys his merciless legions to seize military control of the galaxy. Now remember that phrase, merciless legions. We'll come back to that when we get into the actual scenes, watching the actual opening scenes of this film. But for now, let's focus on the fact that after being told that the First Order reigns, we are now being told that in actual fact they don't reign, because they are sending out their troops around the galaxy to seize military control, whatever that actually means. What is military control as opposed to the First Order reigning? It seems the First Order, in this case, they are a military force, and if they reign, they would have military control. So what exactly are they seizing here if they already control everything? But it doesn't end there. Let's have a look at the next part of the opening crawl of Star Wars The Last Jedi. Only General Leia Organa's band of resistance fighters stand against the rising tyranny. So now what we're actually being told is they don't have control of the galaxy at all. They definitely don't. They are now fighting for control of the galaxy. That's what the opening crawl is telling us. It's telling us something completely different to what the opening sentence declared. Not only that, but we are being told that this is a rising tyranny. Well, if that tyranny reigned, which is what the claim of the first sentence was, that the First Order reigns, they wouldn't be a rising tyranny, they would be an ascendant tyranny. They would have total control. There would be nothing rising about it. A rising tyranny is a threat to the galaxy. It is not a tyranny which reigns. And then we get this: but the resistance has been exposed as the First Order speeds toward the rebel base. The brave heroes mount a desperate escape. Now there's a couple of things, and this could be sort of getting into the territory of nitpicking, but I think it's worth exploring because, again, like I said before, it talks about attention to detail. So we've been introduced to them now as the resistance, and yet we are referring to their base as the rebel base. Now the rebel base is a term that has very specific and previous connotations that apply in the old trilogy. So it seems that it would be more appropriate and more consistent to talk about the resistance base, not the rebel base, if you're renaming the rebels the resistance. It just seems obvious to me that you would do that. The other thing here is to talk about brave heroes mounting a desperate escape. I'm not sure those things sort of go together, do they? I think it would have been better just to say our heroes have no choice but to flee, or to give some sort of brief explanation as to why they would be retreating and running away. I don't know if you describe that kind of action as brave. However, like I said, I'm willing to say that final part of the credit crawl could well be in the territory of nitpicking, but I still think the earlier criticisms of the opening title crawl, they still stand. You can't say that the First Order reigns and then go on to say that in actual fact they're still waging war to try and take control of the galaxy. Why did no one pick that up? Why did no one say, hey, this is an obvious contradiction, we need to fix this? Because this is something so simple. It's just text on a screen. Surely that speaks to the lack of accountability, the lack of oversight, the rushed nature of what was going on here. Now that we've got the opening title crawl out of the way, let's have a look at the opening scenes. Let's watch this now together and pause it as we go to explore the various flaws in the opening 3 minutes or so of Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Now, just let me say a couple of things about this opening shot here. I actually quite like this. I quite like the idea. I thought this was a good creative choice of zooming down from that sort of top to the right, I guess you'd call it, angle of the ships, and to be sort of cutting right through the middle of the traffic there. I thought that was a cool and quite a good creative decision. However, it feels like the shot doesn't go on long enough, because all of a sudden we find ourselves in the situation where what feels like organically something that should keep happening, the shot should keep going and the speed should keep ramping up as we go, all of a sudden there's a hard cut and we are now on the surface of the planet. What I would have preferred to have seen there is that shot to carry on, to keep speeding up as they go through the ships. So they're looking down on the ships, passing through. And then as they get down through the atmosphere and through the clouds, they're now looking at the surface of the planet. You can see ships and rebels on the ground, things lifting off. That ship that we see on screen, as it takes off and lifts off into the air, the camera rushes past it and then around and underneath it, and then it levels off. And all of a sudden, we're now focusing in on our two main characters who we are about to meet. And to me, it feels like that would have been just a better way to actually conclude and follow through on that particular shot. I'm not sure why they didn't do that, but I think that would have been the better choice. But anyway, let's carry on.
30 pallets of cannon shells in sea bunker.
Forget the munitions. There's no time. Just get everyone on the transport. Oh, no.
Okay, so this is quite important because this brief little scene here is establishing some really important stuff. It's establishing the dominance, the power, and the threat, and the seriousness of the threat of the First Order. And when you have someone from the Resistance who looks up into the sky and sees that they've arrived and their first words are, "Oh no," there's a sense of dread and an ominous foreboding threat here that they've acknowledged. And basically they're telling us, the audience, this is really serious, this is dangerous. And so they're establishing something here about the seriousness of the threat. You're setting a tone as well. There's an emotional tone here that's being set with the music and with that statement, "Oh no, this isn't good." And then this carries on. Let's watch as it goes. Now that shot here was kind of important. We'll just talk about that briefly. You have this camera pan across the front of the First Order ship, and then it sort of holds before we actually go inside the ship, the deck of the ship, to see what's happening on there in that part of the ship. We see the fact that this First Order ship takes up almost 2/3 of the frame. So we're really highlighting again the dominance and the reach and the seriousness of the threat. This is all pretty stock standard sort of establishing stuff. Let's carry on and see what happens once we're inside the ship to hear what's being talked about here.
We've caught them in the middle of their evacuation.
I have my orders from Supreme Leader Snoke himself. This is where we snuff out the Resistance once and for all.
So what Hux is doing here, again, reinforcing the seriousness, the somber tone of that little wave of the strings, that little musical motif that's happening underneath. This is serious. His statement, his tone, it's all serious. The dialogue, though, is a little bit weird when you think about that moment in the script when he says that he has his orders have come directly from Supreme Leader Snoke. That is a really strange thing to say when you think about who he is and who he has already established to be as a character in this new trilogy. We know, and everyone in the First Order would know, that he is one of the most senior people in the chain of command. We know from the previous film that he is having personal dialogue and interaction on a, I guess you'd say, semi-regular basis with Supreme Leader Snoke. This guy is important. He's right up there. In fact, in the previous film, we have this setup with him and Kylo Ren. They're effectively like two competing sons who are at war with each other for the affection of Daddy Snoke. That's how high up the chain of command this guy actually goes. He's openly disagreeing with and debating points and that he's contending against Kylo Ren in the previous film. So this guy, we know, is a senior figure in the chain of command. Everyone there would know that. So why would he have to tell people that his orders are coming directly from Supreme Leader Snoke? Everyone on the deck who heard that would probably think, well, yeah, duh. Where else are they coming from? You talk to the guy all the time. Like, we're following your orders. It's not like we're assuming that you're plucking them out of thin air here. Obviously, it's Supreme Leader Snoke who's telling you what to do here. It just seems such a strange thing. Now, maybe you want to say, oh, but Brendan, they're trying to establish something here. They're trying to establish for us, the audience. We've already had that established for us, though. We've already been told that Snoke has sent out his military forces to go and make war and take control of the galaxy. So it's kind of obvious. We don't need to have a line of dialogue establishing what we've already been told in the opening title crawl of this film. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense, that particular piece of dialogue. Leaving that aside, though, as I said, there is the ominous tone. There's an emotional tone here. There is an establishing of something here. It's that merciless legions. Remember that phrase? This is really what's being highlighted here. We're going to destroy them once and for all.
Tell Captain Kennedy to prime his dreadnought, incinerate their base, destroy their transports, and obliterate their fleet.
So again, the merciless legions. This is serious. This threat is ominous. It's evil. It's overwhelming. This is all pretty stock standard establishing stuff. And then we get the big reveal, if I guess you want to call it that, of the dreadnought, which goes like this. So you have this evil-looking ship that looks like it would be right at home in the film Event Horizon. Lots of dark shadows and sharp edges and glowing red bits. This thing is big, it's huge, it's got these two whopping great cannons that look like planet destroyers underneath it. Again, what are we doing here? We're setting an emotional tone. We're establishing the seriousness of the threat. Now, I know this might sound like I'm sort of labouring needlessly the same point over and over again about establishing the serious nature of the threat here, but you'll see why in a minute I'm doing that and why this really matters, to really highlight how much attention they have put into establishing a tone here and a level of seriousness about the threat that is posed by the First Order to the Resistance.
General, resistance ship approaching. Guns and shields in attack mode.
This is an interesting piece of dialogue here. A couple of things that I noticed about this straight away. Number one was the piece of dialogue. Which ship is she actually referring to when she talks about guns and shields being in attack mode? Is it their ship? Or is it the Resistance fighter? I'm assuming it's the Resistance fighter, but that dialogue is clumsy if that is the case. because it seems to me that a more obvious line of dialogue, and I don't understand why it's so clumsy. It's just so simple to me that you would just say, there's a resistance fighter approaching. It has shields and weapons in attack mode, something like that. It's very simple. It's very clear to the audience who you're talking about. But then there's also the directorial decision here. The way she has delivered this line to me just doesn't feel like the best possible take that you could get of that actor delivering that line. There's sort of a weird intonation, a weird phrasing of it, and particularly the second half of the sentence, where her voice sort of elevates a little bit. It just seems kind of strange. To me, it doesn't seem like the best possible take they could have used, unless, of course, there were better takes and Rian Johnson had no control over this and it just ended up on the cutting room floor. But either way, it seems that there must have been a better take, or if there wasn't, there needed to have been another take to get the delivery of that line just a little bit more sharper. It doesn't feel strong at all. It sort of really sticks out. It stuck out to me initially. It feels more like someone in a theatre acting troupe than it does in a big budget film. But let's carry on.
A single light fighter.
Okay, so a single light fighter, like obviously what? This doesn't pose any threat. He talks, he turns to his I guess 2IC, the next lowest ranking officer on the deck, and looks at him and he says, no, why would that be a problem? There's this big question mark of, what's the threat here? In other words, they're still dominant. Why the heck would they come at us with just one fighter? Establishing the dominance, the seriousness of the threat, the carrying on with this. Now, this is an interesting shot selection. And to me, this is where symbolism isn't actually being applied as it should. And this is something you can do in the whole process of making a film. You can actually use visuals to very powerful effect to actually symbolize important things and to really verify and back up exactly what is going on with the script and what is supposed to be happening at that point in the film. Now, what I mean by that is when you look at this visual here, what do you see? You see Poe Dameron's X-Wing fighter up against the Dreadnought. But the problem is the framing. The way that shot has been framed doesn't actually produce the kind of symbolism you want in that moment. You have got a small, tiny, solitary fighter up against this huge destroyer, the Dreadnought, right? So what you should see is not a framing where they look equal in size. You have I guess what you might call a forced perspective issue going on here, where the X-Wing doesn't actually look a lot smaller when put alongside the Dreadnought. Now, that's not the symbolism you want at this moment in the film. The symbolism you want is tiny little ship against huge, ominous threat. That's what you want, because that's what you've established. This is the merciless legions. This is the all-powerful First Order. The First Order where a resistance member looks up and says, oh no. And then you have a shot like this, which actually makes them look like they are more evenly matched. Now, obviously they're not. But even if you don't notice this, subconsciously your mind is picking up on this symbolism or lack of symbolism. It seems to me that the obvious choice here would have been to move the camera right back so that in actual fact you can see you're a lot further back and you can see how small, like a little fly, that X-Wing fighter is when it's contrasted against the Dreadnought. But we don't get that. We get this shot instead. And to me, this speaks of that lack of creative accountability when no one was saying, hey, maybe this isn't the best shot selection here. Maybe we need to do this a little differently to keep that consistent tone established and to show the menace and the ominous nature of the threat, not to create a symbolism which actually looks like they're fairly evenly matched and just dispels all of the threat and the seriousness and the reach and the power of the First Order just in that one single shot.
Happy beats here, buddy. Come on. We pulled crazier stunts than this.
Just for the record, Commander Dameron, I'm with the droid on this one.
Thank you for your support, General.
Now, this is interesting here. And I'll tell you why this is interesting. Because what this little piece of dialogue, this tiny few seconds of interaction establishes for us, the audience, is that Poe Dameron actually has a lot of what you might call, I don't know, creative freedom when it comes to military decision making. It appears to indicate that the Resistance is making decisions in a way where leadership is done by committee. It's more democratic than hierarchical. So you've got General Leia, who is effectively saying to us that she didn't necessarily agree with this plan, but she's given it the okay, that this is effectively Poe Dameron's idea, and that she's okay for it to happen. What that indicates is that there is a lot more freedom in the military decision-making of this particular operation than what there would be under a hierarchical structure where the orders are handed down to you and you are expected to follow them. Now, why is this important? Because you're establishing now a tone around military decision-making and around the nature of the Resistance and how it actually operates that you then don't follow through on later on in the film and one of the important plot points. What was that plot point? It's when Poe Dameron all of a sudden becomes an insubordinate, and Holdo treats him as someone who should be acting as if the leadership and command structure of the Resistance is hierarchical in nature, but that's not what they establish at the beginning. This indicates to us that Leia wasn't necessarily on board with this, but she's okay to let it happen.
Happy babies.
Attention! This is Commander Poe Dameron of the Republic Fleet. I have an urgent communique for General Hux.
Patch him through.
Okay, so here we have the famous or the infamous Hugs joke. This was a bad idea. I don't know why anyone thought this would be a good idea. Hugs and Hux are two words that sound almost identical. Now, when you're telling a joke, you don't want two words like that. I would suggest that sounds so identical that most people are going to miss the joke that's being told, especially when you take into account the fact that different actors are going to bring different accents to the way they pronounce words. And so for the audience, we're probably likely to sort of compensate for that in the way we hear it. And we're going to assume in our minds, as most of us did the first time we saw this, that he was saying Hux. And he wasn't trying to be funny by saying Hugs. So the joke is sort of lost. And then on top of that, he's speaking through a radio, quote unquote. And so you have the muffled character to the words that he's saying. Again, the joke is getting lost here. It just seems like this was a bad idea. So even if you are a supporter of this, I think it's a moment of absolute absurdity that has no real place in this film. It's just not tonally consistent. But even if you loved it and thought it was the best thing since sliced bread, surely you can see that Hugs and Hux and the way this was all done, you know, the joke needed to start subsequent to that, you know, where he starts doing what we're about to watch him do, but not by using the word Hugs. It just seems like the whole thing was lost. It wasn't until a subsequent viewing that I actually realised, oh, he's not saying Hux. It's not immediately clear to you that that's what's going on, and that's not, what would you call it, well-structured comedy. It should be obvious, because what he's doing here is supposed to be obvious, but it's not obvious to us, the audience.
This is General Hux of the First Order. The Republic is no more. Your fleet are rebel scum and war criminals. Tell your precious princess there will be no terms. There will be no surrender.
Okay, again, we are back into this mode of establishing the seriousness and the merciless nature that we got. Remember, we were told this right in the opening title crawl. We then get the merciless nature on display again, the seriousness of the music. We're back and we're sort of in that mode, even though things have slipped a little bit previously in the previous couple of scenes. All of a sudden, we're back into this mode, and so we've salvaged it. We're back on track, and then all of a sudden, this happens.
Hi, I'm holding for General Hux.
This is Hux. You and your friends are doomed. We will wipe your filth from the galaxy.
Okay, I'll hold.
Hello?
Hello? Yep, I'm still here.
This had no place at all in Star Wars. This is a parody moment that would be appropriate if you were the Wayans brothers and you were making a parody of Star Wars, one of their parody films, or, I don't know, you're Mel Brooks and you're doing some sort of parody film, or perhaps you're Seth MacFarlane, this is a Family Guy Star Wars parody. That is totally appropriate for that kind of content. It isn't appropriate here. So you've now completely undermined everything that you have established here. So you've told us that they are merciless. You've shown us the seriousness of the threat. You've got people, senior members of the resistance who look up and go, oh no, when they arrive. And then we get this. What does this tell us? This tells us they're not merciless. It tells us that they're incompetent. It tells us there's no real threat here. This is not good filmmaking. This is a stark and completely inappropriate tonal inconsistency for this film. But it goes on. Let's have a look at what happens next.
Can he hear me?
Hugs?
He can.
With an H? Skinny guy? Kind of pasty?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Look, I can't hold forever. If you reach him, tell him Leia has an urgent message for him.
I believe he's tooling with you, sir.
About his mother.
And there you have it. The Yo Mama joke in Star Wars, again, had absolutely no place. It completely undermines everything that they're trying to establish in this film. And then what it wants to do is it wants to go back into serious mode after having done this parody and having your senior commanding officers looking at each other and thinking, yeah, this guy's an idiot, he's a total incompetent fool, and having him act like a buffoon, and having Poe Dameron talk down to him in such a way that indicates there is no threat here. All this talk of merciless legions is a farce based on what we're seeing here. This is a glaring tonal, emotional, it's a total inconsistency. You're undermining your own film by doing this stupid stuff here. This is not good filmmaking. And then, as I said, it ends with that yo mama joke from Poe Dameron. And then just to hammer home the point about the incompetence, we get this.
Open fire!
So you have Hux. Now, this is a little thing, but it's kind of important. Again, you might not have thought too hard about it at the time, but your brain is registering certain things based on what you're seeing happening on screen. Hux turns in an absolute fit of rage and says, open fire! What you would expect from the merciless legions is this sort of frightening and total dominance and control. So he's just been ridiculed, and he doesn't respond by losing his temper. He responds with this cool, calm, calculated malevolence where he just says, destroy that ship now. And there's no sense of him having been slighted or wronged. Instead, what you get is this idea that he is totally committed to these evil goals, that he's not even bothered by personal insults. Let's carry on.
BB-8, punch it!
He's going for the dreadnought.
Now, isn't that interesting? Just to wrap this little segment up, what do you see there on screen? You see a tiny little fly-sized version of an X-Wing fighter facing off against a dreadnought. Now, I know it's not perfect because we can't see the whole ship, and it's still not the greatest example of how to show the size difference, but it does show you something, that they could have actually shown you the difference in size between these two crafts, because they do it here in this particular shot. Why wasn't that done earlier? It seems to me that the symbolism is just all wrong in that earlier shot, and they clearly could have used another shot. We see it here. We see the size difference. Again, it's sort of hammering home the point, but albeit a little bit too late now, about what Poe Dameron is trying to do here and about the insanity of this mission. But none of that comes through because the script writing is bad, the symbolism is lacking, he's making jokes as if there's absolutely no threat. He does not consider these people to be a threat. They are acting, far from being merciless legions, they are acting like total incompetent buffoons that no one would be scared of. Now, before you say, oh yeah, but this is just, it is what it is, this is not really bad filmmaking, stop and ask yourself for a second what this would have looked like if this was actually the original Star Wars, the first film in the first trilogy, Star Wars, A New Hope. And this is how the rebels had interacted with Darth Vader. Instead of what we actually see in that film, imagine if it was this type of thing that we saw in that film. Darth Vader would not be a threat. He would be a joke. He would be effectively, I guess, a comical villain, a court jester of sorts, a clown. We, the audience, would have no respect or fear of his menace. Now, why is this important? Because what this has done here is they have stripped all dramatic tension out of the film. There's no dramatic tension once you get into parody. There is no dramatic tension once the characters on screen are acting as if there's no real threat here. Even if you didn't notice it consciously, your mind subconsciously is picking up on this. This is not good filmmaking. And if they'd done this sort of thing with the original Star Wars movie, then I guarantee you that it would not be the hugely popular and lucrative franchise that it is today. There would not be Star Wars The Last Jedi. There would have been no prequels. We would have been lucky to even get a sequel. It would have been a one-off film that was taken nowhere near as seriously as it actually ended up being taken, because that would not have been good filmmaking. It would not have been excellence in filmmaking. It would have been a joke. And that's exactly what we've ended up with here. And that carries on. That's the first 3 minutes or so and the opening credit crawl, title crawl of this film. These problems are real, and they carry on like that throughout the rest of the film, and then from this point on they only get bigger. This isn't good filmmaking. You can spin this 20 ways from Sunday. This is not good filmmaking. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comment section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please consider financially supporting the channel. The links for how you can do that are in the video description below. See you next time on Left Foot Media.